Well, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Um, Maybe I will just jump right into it then.
Okay.
What is the Lau method, and why? And
You
why
mean
develop your own method?
okay? I'll just kind of talk and see where it all lands. Okay. I originally I didn't know that I need a method. I wasn't the kind of person who hatch out of an egg thinking that I need to have my own method. I was just sort of doing the thing that everyone was doing, like going to conservatory and feeling very confused of why I don't like the music that everyone was making, but then maybe it's me. Um, and I was good at things. I was good at sort of, I call it, you hear me say that a lot, the line cook method of making music. I'm good at taking instruction and making nice sounds. And then my senior year in undergrad, I had a class with Lansing McCloskey. Have you heard of him? He's a composer, and he taught a class that was an ensemble that does only medieval music and new music. And at that time, both things were so new to me. Although, like, I did a lot of new music before, but not like this. So we're doing like basically music that I could not comprehend at all in any way. We're doing the panda chant, we chant for like 45 minutes, and I was so confused. But I loved it for no reason. I just really liked it. I'm like, oh, finally, something I like. And I was good at it because, when you're a good musician, doing that kind of music is also fun because it's so much of like reading and counting and like improvising, and I could do it. So that was the very beginning of like, maybe things don't have to be the same. But that ensemble was so like only one semester, and then I graduated and I started doing other things. So then I started teaching high school and elementary school, and just doing the regular thing that you do after undergrad, which is confusion. But then through teaching, I was trained in Karl Orff's method, Orff-Schuwerk, and most people see Orff-Schuwerk as a method to work with children. But basically, immediately, the moment I started studying it, I realized this is also a method that can be applied to anything, which is you can improvise on day one. And these are the methods. And so that was a little bit like Improv 101. Why don't we all do it? So I use my elementary school students as guinea pigs. I just use them for a couple years. I did these ensembles where the entire show was improvised. And they were in fifth grade. And it worked, and it was wonderful. So something kind of started to like brew in me. Then I realized I need to go somewhere to a big city. I went to Boston. I did graduate school in medieval music. So that's when you wanted to ask me a bunch of questions about uh, um, early music. So other people talk about early music like it's Baroque music. That's what they think. But when you say early music to me, I think of medieval music immediately. That's what makes me excited. And so I started getting into medieval music, and I realized my skill set, which is I'm willing to try anything, any language, any pitch, any sort of a random notation, perfect. Because doing medieval music is basically like that. You have like a fragment of some ideas, and then you have to make new stuff. Um, Improv, improv with like extreme reading, I call it, and it was really fun. So that was how it sort of started my idea of like, oh, maybe some part of this can go together, but I still don't know how. You know what I mean? They're still very much like other people's projects and other people's ideas. And then so like through grad school, I did a lot of Dalpros and plastic anime. These different techniques of improv, and I'm starting to think, how can I incorporate the new music that I really want to do into the old music that's actually new music that I want to do, and also touch on the social, interpersonal, emotional aspect of lives that I actually want to talk about with music. I don't want to talk about the old topics anymore. I don't want to talk about whether like this sonata is in good form, So, but I still didn't know how. So the very first project that the Broken Consort did, which is in grad school, was one third medieval music with jazz. So I basically just asked a free jazz improv saxophonist to come in and improvise doing medieval music. And then and then I would give him some themes, and he would just randomly improvise on the themes. And then the last third of the music was new music. So you can see, like, while I didn't really have a way yet, I started to have some ideas, and then I was really bored with that because it was just like really sound focused. It was not process focused. I didn't know how to put it together, and I didn't know how to affect other people. And so over the next 10 years is when I start to really go in and painstakingly develop a method that I think works to address the deficiency of myself as a director and a composer and other people as collaborators. So the Lau method is a highly collaborative way to make music that really highly honors the individuality of each person, but actually uses the process itself to improvise. The process is the improvisation in a way, and the music that we make are collectively owned, and the process is collectively owned, and it's different every time. So I know it sounds so like not defined, but we'll talk more, and it will come into being in a moment. And currently, okay, Lau method currently is for most projects we live together for 7 to 12 days. Oh, hello, this is my coffee delivery. Um, uh, we live together from 7 to 12 days together. We always live under the same roof or in the very immediate neighborhood, and you have to be away from your everyday distraction. So the whole point is that you're away, and we have a group of people to go through a process that addresses your emotional, physical, and interpersonal needs. And then we make a project together by the end of this period. And we cook all our meals together. We basically produce and improvise and interpret together. Yeah, so that's a very short intro, I guess.
Well, how has that method been refined over the years? Like, how would you compare how it is now to what it was when you started?
Long story short is that I used to leave a lot more pieces to random happenstance. And over the years, I have been more insistent on certain things being not negotiable. So, for example, at the very beginning, I let some people commute. Some people cannot be in residence. It doesn't work. Those people oftentimes don't belong to the collective. You would feel it every time they enter and exit. There was a moment that the connection breaks, and then the work doesn't really speak to that person anymore. It's very interesting. Another one is I have completely now done away with using a outside producer for recording projects, and that's through experimentation of. At some point, I still thought it is important that I get the blessing of the mainstream. You know, like someone famous must produce our disc. And now, in the last project that was wildly good, that according to me, we collectively produced the disc because we are the best producer for the disc. We alone know where the line is and when to stop and when to keep going. And so some of these are examples. And another one is certain personalities works better than others. Like people being open to trying new things. And in the past, I would be much more likely to have someone come into the process thinking that because they are wonderful musicians, they're really virtuosic and they're really on top of things that they can go through this process. But if the personality of collaborative spirit is not there, or they're not willing to try and put themselves on the line and be uncomfortable, that doesn't work. So like that is another one.
How is improvisation critical to that method?
Oh, okay. I have notes here actually. Let me see. It's too many things. It's easy to just kind of like go into a rabbit hole and can't come out. Okay. Okay, there are many level of this. I would say I'm aware that like my process is quite different from the conventional approaches to making even new music because usually composers or directors use one method. They would have either like the whole piece is with text prompt and then you improvise, or the whole piece is written and then you improvise in the periods, you know, in the specific places that you improvise, or the entire piece is free improvisation, you know. And I would say almost all of my pieces is a mixture of that. So some of them I already have an idea of what the sound world has to be And then we all discovered that sound world together through improv. And some of them, I don't know what the sound world is going to be, and I don't care. Some of it is I actually want the text prompt or the physical prompt, or even the prompt as is the connection of the people in the group to just drive the music. In that way, those are the that's the process of what, like how improvisation is really central to that. And in some other pieces is that I actually believe that my writing is significantly inferior to what people can do, and I allow them to use the prompt that I give them as sort of just some inspirational practice, to go much further into what they want to say. And then whatever they have to say is the work, is our work. Yeah. And that's how important it is in the professional level of work. And in terms of working with amateurs, I think improvisation should be introduced from the very beginning and not as a privilege of the select few.
I'm wondering if all of the people this is probably not true, but of the people you've collaborated with, I mean, how many of them were well-versed improvisers going into it, and how many didn't really improvise but were willing to try, and you had a sense that they would be open to this? I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
And then what happened to those people who had not improvised after working with your collaborators?
Thank you for asking that. I think that is actually where the art comes in. In general, I would say that my project would always have at least 30% ish of the participants being very experienced uh, improviser or people who has done this particular process many times, because we need some level of calmness. People saying we can do this. I know it seems crazy on the outset and we're just doing yoga for 2 days, but trust me, we're gonna get there. And then I always like to bring in 2 or 3 people, so that's another 20% or so, 30% who are completely new but really want to learn. Either they have experienced some other of my work before or word of mouth. And I usually choose them because of, like, I would say proven evidence that they are people who practice openness in their other lives. And that's easy to find. And so the experience I have is people who are terrified of doing it, who has never done it before, needs around 2 to 3 cycles of this to get to a point where they can enter the 20-30% of I can do this anytime. But it's doable. It's doable, and they can succeed in this method even when they're not really experienced, because I think the training to do it is part of it. And that is the part that I'm getting better at over time too. Is in the past, I think learning can happen only organically, but also now I realize, in this kind of situation, learning can also happen in a really concerted way. You can put it in as almost like a curriculum, and people appreciate that actually.
How do you select the people who are going to be involved in your projects?
Very tricky, huh? It's very tricky. The real answer is that it's intuition. But I also realized that yesterday that a lot of time I don't conceive a project and then find the people to fill the roles. Oftentimes I am collecting people, and when there's a critical mass of the people I want to collect are available, then I create a container for a project to happen. So a really good example, I recently made a short film, and it was that I have five collaborators who. Oh, actually, this is interesting to talk about. So for the longest time, I only do collaborations with musicians and dancers. So I know that this process works with musicians and dancers, and I was really curious: would it work with filmmakers? Would it work with fine artists and computer graphic artists? Like, is this really a method, or is it just a thing that I do? It's different. So I have these friends who are different. I have a fine artist from San Diego. I have a musician who has done nothing but church music his entire life, so never even perform outside of church, basically. And then I have a computer graphic artist who does, animation and special effects. I have a project manager type artist who does large scale touchscreen installation. So I have a bunch of random people, basically. And I thought, you know what? All of these people has been saying that they want to work with me for years. And maybe it's time to try it out and see if it is true. So we get together and we talk about like what are some, so very typical, a lot of time before a project I would say, let's get together and talk about what it is that you care about in the world. What are some of the things on your mind? And so people start talking about different things that was on their mind. And we go around a circle, talk for quite a while, actually. And then we decided that we're going to get together for 10 days in the desert in Tucson in a house together and see what it is that we'll make. And we didn't know. And so at the end of it, we made a film. And it was really great. And but I actually follow very strictly the method. I'll tell you what the method is now, finally, is we every day, I'll tell you right here, actually, it would be easier if I look at it. We live together for 7 to 10 days, and we spend 1 to 2 hours in the morning, first thing in the morning, to do physical and emotional exercises. So a lot of time there are methods in expressive art therapy, movement therapy, like these are typical things, and new methods of communication. A lot of time we can lift them from social movements and other really basically contemporary communication methods. And then we play physical improv games. And then sometimes we play a little bit of musical improv games. And the idea is that later we can transfer those feelings and connections and methods into music for the people, who are new to this. And then we would have, 2 to 6 hours of musical rehearsal, which is sometimes really strict, like you're trying to learn something, and some other time just playing around. We would pick up a book of poetry and just go nuts and free improv. And sometimes we can get materials from there as well. And then, so I call that like 3 hours of, and then we have 3 to 6 hours of free association, hanging out, cooking all our meals, and processing. It's quite a lot of that, talking about our own life, because sometimes the materials comes from there. So, and then why cooking is important is that think about putting together an artistic project is a lot like cooking. How do you make something that is nutritionally and dietarily satisfying for each person? And they all need different things. So every meal you have to check in and really think through the process and get other people to help you and think through them. And so I always thought that there was an interesting part of that. And then I check in with each team member every day to make sure that we're still on the same page. If they need something, they want to complain or add to the process, we'll do that the next day. So usually in this process, the more concrete things, like actual notes that we have to learn and questions we have to answer, happens earlier in the week, sort of all at once. So beginning is quite a lot of like harder things, and then the slow skill building, like teaching people how to ease into a piece that is all improv, or that you need to improvise with people you've never met before, on a text that you've never read before, takes longer, takes the whole 7 to 10 days. And we usually record those movements the latest, and if we have to record or perform them. And then so if a job can be done by a team member, someone in the team, say, is a expressive arts therapist, that person will lead all of those sessions because they want to practice that as well, and they're the specialists, and we all learn from them. And any skills that hasn't been, like, no one is a specialist for, I usually go in and fill that role for the time being. So it's actually quite fun. If you do a lot of these projects, you learn a lot of skills that you usually don't have. So there you go.
Can you describe some of especially the physical improv exercises? I don't want you to give away any secrets, but I'm just wondering,
No secret.
what types of things you do together.
Okay, describe. So I would say that, like, imagine some typical physical improv exercises come from the physical theater world. So, for example, one of them would be close your eyes right now. Close your eyes. And you are a stick of butter on a butter dish. and the sun is shining on you. It's late afternoon sun, it's really warm. And then you start to feel a certain corner of yourself melting and disappearing. And then you know that when you melt, you can unmelt. So some part of you melt all together, and some part of you melt slowly, and then you melt all the way to the ground and you become a puddle. So that's a fast forward one, you know. So this is like a 5-minute, you melt for 5 minutes. And then sometimes I would then ask the musicians to do that particular exercise in terms of sound. What would that sound like if it is a piece of music? So it's not completely unguided, you know, but it's not just aesthetic base. Sometimes they could be anything. But generally, I would say that I am less personally interested in no boundaries improv. I use them a lot as practice. But like and then I like to use improvisations to find specific aesthetic points where we can use to tell stories, or that would fit into the greater narrative of what we need to do. So I would say that the range of sounds, the range of possibilities is as wide as the people I hang out with. So in a certain project, if everyone that I work with is very tonal, they like really tonal music, they like really a certain kind of music, then those projects sounds more that. And that's totally cool. I think that's a reflection of what they do. And then in the projects that I have a project where I work with someone who mostly specializes in dance and disco music. So that project is all dance and disco music, and that's okay too, as long as for me that it works to serve the narrative that we want to give. So that was an example of one of the exercises. We have exercises where we touch each other and adjust and transfer energies as individuals, small groups, and large groups. We have exercises where we use looking at each other, giving bodily cues as sort of a prompt for improv. So many games, it's like unlimited. I think I can give you 600 like on the spot. So it's really, yeah. So
It sounds like an awesome book you should write, all these exercises.
Yeah. And all these exercises, like some of them come from Orff, like Dalcroze, and so many from physical theater. And I actually went to Germany a couple years ago for Kyle was there for 3 weeks, basically just to learn the process and the way that theater people describe their improv and devising process, because I feel like it's a little bit less codified in the music world. So I like to learn more process and lingo to describe my own thing when I'm doing it.
As someone who has done a project with you and gone through this method, one of the things that was immediately remarkable to me about that is that on day one, you know, we showed up, we got the book, we had a meal, like there wasn't a whole lot of talking. It was a lot of like, this is how it's going to go. And then if you remember, we went to the dance studio and played maybe 3 hours of these games and then sat in a circle. And I think your prompt was like, because no one really, some people knew one another, but a lot of people, myself, I was completely new to the group. And it was like, you said like, say who you are and the energy you're bringing into this. And immediately everybody took a knife and cut their heart open and then just like put it out there into the world. And that really, I mean, it was remarkable to me. I don't think I've ever been in a group that really just opened up like that. And I think it was very much indicative of like what we just went through together. Like that was the cause of it, but it set the tone for the whole thing, which was really an amazing experience. And I'm wondering if every time you go through this method, that kind of thing happens. And if that's, I mean, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the whole point of this is for that moment.
Yes. Yep. And I think for me, that's my difficulty in a way as a director and a marketer, is it's hard to encapsulate that. Like, how do you describe that? Except for if someone else talks about it. If no one else talked about it, you're like, well, the feeling is you will suddenly have a moment of joy. And then everything will be okay. Another thing I actually want to say is I usually put one person in each process that I think might struggle a lot. And either that they are socially or politically very different, or they are extremely inexperienced but willing. The willing is important. They're not willing, they can't be there. But like they have to be willing, but actually it has to be a challenge, because I think that I want to see that the method actually works to include those people that seem so different. So either that I would have, for example, a musician or an artist who come from a very different discipline. You know, like I might have 5 jazz musicians and then one person who has never done jazz. So now all the jazz musicians can no longer communicate in jargons. That is a really important one. Same thing with early music. You have a bunch of early music musicians in the room and they now talk about rhetoric. And then you have a person in there going like, I just have no idea what you're talking about. Now you have to bring it into human language. And I want that process to also be a teaching moment for everyone in a long run, So, yeah. So to answer your question, that was my own question too. Does that work every time? So far, yes. And why? I am not totally sure. I think that's the expectation. I'm starting to even write it on the contract that I sent to people. I say you have to come ready to open your heart and your mind and be willing to be a vessel for whatever it is that you do. And I don't know what it is that you do. I don't know what we're gonna do. It could be anything. So, yeah.
I'm overwhelmed.
Is it?
No, this is awesome. Well, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I'm thinking like, how does one implement this in a classroom setting or with a studio of students? What would the starting place be? And you've taught younger students. I mean, I'm talking about college age students,
Yeah, yeah.
but any students. I mean, have you tried your refined method with younger students?
Yes, I have.
So
I
what
was
is
just
what are some
on
steps
a
you take?
I was just on a 2-hour walk with a colleague talking exactly about that. So I teach at a collegiate level and also in the community level. And what I have learned is that giving that space for emotional connection and the consistent connection is a thing that you have to insist on doing from the very beginning. You have to demand it. So like I would basically tell my students, if you come into my voice studio, I say that like lesson 1, you will tell me everything. You will tell me everything and we'll be best friends, basically. And because I will be able to tell what's going on with you by the way you sing. So eventually you cough it all up anyway. And your limitations as a musician, as an artist, and even as a person, will be revealed through this process, because I believe that the artistic process is what we should teach people, not the aesthetic of music or art. Not just that, like this is pretty, that is not pretty, it's all judgment. But the process of artistic discovery is different. It's like a never ending road. You can always find something more to be mindful about. So with that is I never start any rehearsal without some form of physical exercise, physical or improv exercise with the entire group at all levels. So even when I go in and teach a lecture, sometimes I would do this with everyone. I'll make them do it. And at the beginning, it was making them, but eventually, you know what? They want it. They expect it because it helps them transition from a really cerebral place to a place where everything can happen. So I want them to see time with me as a random place, a place that they can take risk and do random things. So like, so when I was teaching young kids, I would do crazy dance improv parties and all kinds of things, just like I do with adults, for the first 10 minutes of every class. Because if I do it, then for the rest of the class, they're actually quite spent and they can focus. And with adults, I feel like that 10 to 20 minutes sometimes is the time that I can bring them from the work brain, the like spreadsheet brain, to a brain that they can be a little bit more soft. And the college I teach at is a place where people are too smart, like really smart academically. So they also need that transition quite a bit. So with my private students, the first thing when they come in every week is I make them talk. We can't just make music immediately. We're always talking and chatting, and I would ask them to translate some of their emotions into either physical manifestation, like we move together, or I will make them make sounds, not music necessarily, but make sounds or rhythm that depict their feelings. So to connect sort of the two sides together. So like, but over time, if they're willing to just kind of go with it, over time it really makes all parts of their music making better, because so much of music making is the willingness to make it, is to the willingness to take a risk and look like a fool and do too much of something. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. I'm just wondering, like, well, what happens when there's a student who is just like unwilling to open up, and does it just take a while, or are there certain things that you've learned to do that gets them to do it quickly?
There's no quickly. Yeah, I think that's another one. Is I think so much of the common artistic world, like the regular one, is really fast paced, and we expect results, and that's why we ignore people who takes more time. And I think it's the same with us with colleagues, and that's why we like people who can just bang out the work. And we're much less likely to invest time in a colleague over a long term, seeing what they can be. And like one thing I really like about the way that I do my projects is some people that I've been with for 10 years, and they're very different artists today as they were 10 years ago. And 10 years ago they play an instrument, and 10 years later they don't even want to play anymore, they just want to write text. And I have a space for them, instead of like, well, you're no longer the person who can make that music, so I don't want you anymore. And I think it's really cool to have a thing that you can honor people where they are. Yeah. Yeah. So time is a good one. So there are students who are really closed up, where I would say every week I would say, all right, tell me one thing that was great this week and one thing that sucked, every week. And then they would just begrudgingly answer, but after 5 weeks, they realize that it's something they have to say. So they start to put more of themselves. And then I would start to incorporate their answers into a warm up. So we would sing and clap and like bang on things about what they care about. And over time, they start to get it, and they don't fight me so much. Actually, they don't fight me at all. They just know. I'm like, if you want boring lessons, you should sign up with another teacher. It won't work for me. Yeah. Yeah. So that's it.
Is what you're teaching all of these students, is it primarily voice lessons, or do you, I mean, what else do you teach? Do you mostly teach early music now, or?
On paper, I teach voice lessons. In actuality, I would say that I am doing 1/3 therapy, like intense therapy, 1/3 how to be a human being and how to be an artist, and 1/3 let's make some sounds. And in the past, I would say that like people are drawn to me originally because they hear like I can do early music and new music well, But then now I feel confident now after going through many students that I can teach in any style because it's nothing to do with it, So if you want to do hip hop, we can do that too. You want to do pop, and I try to actually at this point dictate less on what people should like and not like. I say you like what you like, and I will keep introducing you to new things that you might end up liking too. But there's no hierarchy of that. So it's really fun. So it's like music appreciation as well. It really depends, I think, on the school you teach at. So I don't teach at a conservatory, so there's no need to meet certain expectations. Yeah. More questions?
It seems like I really like this non-hierarchy thing, and it seems very much like in your method, you're also trying to break down this hierarchy
Yeah.
of composer, performer. I mean, everybody in the project is kind of doing or responsible for everything, or at least everything that they want to do within it.
Yeah. Recently, I did a thing where you don't have a title in the project, and you decide what what title you want at the end of the project, and it's great. So if you want to produce, because for some people for their career, what they need to learn is how to produce an album or how to produce a show, then I would mentor you and will teach you all the methods, you know, and the process. And you can be a producer. You will have the credit, you know. And if you want to be the art director, as long as you do the work during the thing, you can be whatever you want. So it's like the other way. Instead of like giving you a title and then you jam yourself into it, instead is that you grow into whatever role you would like to and call yourself whatever you like. Yeah. Did you want to ask me about Costa Concordia?
Yeah, do you want to talk about it?
How much time do we have?
As much time as you have.
Free form talking now. All right, we can improvise on this. You want to ask the question so that people can hear what you ask?
So, I mean, so maybe start off by saying, like, what is Costa Concordia and what happened when you were on it?
Okay. So Costa Concordia was a cruise ship that had 4,300 people, and it sank into the Mediterranean Sea around 8 years ago. And I was on it during my honeymoon. And basically, I had a really traumatic experience, near death experience that caused me to have severe PTSD for quite a while. And so, and I often say that that event was a watershed moment in my artistic and personal life. And like I've been to places and like seen things. I feel like that has completely changed me. And once I was done with that, I need to come back and do something else. So partly is when I was going through the disaster, I remember thinking to myself, what was driving everything that I do before this moment? And why do I feel that every day I wake up with so much fear? Like waking up making music was a scary thing in a way because there's an ideal, the good music and the correct career. And then I'm, you know, comparing myself against that in a way. Like, what does it look like? So, and as I'm like scrambling around, like dying, not kidding, like literally dying, I remember making a promise to myself. I said, if I don't die, I would like to be courageous. I would like all of my projects, I would like my art to be about love and courage and not of fear and like lacking. So that was a really big one. And then when I came out, I feel like I had a moment where I advanced from line cook to chef like overnight. But I didn't know how, didn't have a restaurant, you know. So over time, before that I actually barely composed any music, barely. I might have composed like 2 or 3 pieces to accompany some other things. I never saw the need. But as I was recovering from PTSD, my therapist said, you know, you're very lucky. You're an artist. You know, artists can talk about their trauma in their art. And I remember thinking, like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Brahms, nope. Beethoven, nope. Mozart, nope. Look through all of the repertoire, you know, the common practice repertoire. None of them works. And then suddenly it was really clear to me that the answer is not out there. The answer is inside of me. And of course, the fear person came out and said, but you don't have a doctoral degree from Princeton. You know, you may not compose. And I killed that person real quick and just start making a disc. Actually, I set a goal for myself and I said, hey, like, I need to make an album at the 1 year anniversary of the disaster. I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the shipwreck and the shit I saw and what happened. And then so because we were on the press like quite a lot, we were on TV and newspapers and NPR quite a lot. There were record companies that want to sign, you know, want to like, oh, I want in on this project because it's going to be profitable. I remember saying to myself that maybe for the first time in my life, I need to go do it alone. I need to do it without any institutions and other people guiding my work because I've only known what it's like to be guided. So what if I have no guide and just go crazy one time? Never done it before, never made a CD by myself. I recorded many other people's CD and I just did it. And then after that, that was my first work, Our Lucidity. And that changed everything. It gave me a lot of confidence of like, you can do things as long as you just go and do it. And I think Kyle has asked me before how much of that disc was improvised. It was maybe more than half. Like it was a container improvisation, I call it. So there were, it was, it's clear what part of it is I think you can do whatever, and what part of it will come back and talk more. And some other places where that we just actually let the tape roll for 2 hours, and I went in and find things that I like and glue them together. And that was new. I didn't know I could do that. There's so many new things, but it's a very different learning process than going to school because there was no answer anymore, And like at that point when I was done, I was part excited and part upset because it's not as refined as I would have liked, because I've been involved in like fancy commercial project, as a line cook. So I know that's not, it's supposed to feel like this. But now, 8 years later, when I look at the thing, I'm happy that I did it because that lays the foundation of what I need to do later. And I can see it for what it is. It's my first work. Of course, it's kind of, janky. Yeah. So.
Does every one of your projects, because the one that we did together also was about 50-ish% improvisation, do you always give the space to the project to let that happen? Or is
Yeah.
it sometimes more, sometimes less? You just dial it in?
I would say 50-ish% is about right. And so doing pure music recording project is one kind of project. I've also done performance art project where it's also like that. I would say the performance art project is even higher. It's like 80% improv. And I would say that my process is actually a mixture of improv and devising. Devising, it would be closer to the truth. I use improvisation to look for routes and to eliminate routes that we all really don't like. So that when we finally get to the point, we can choose from fewer things that we know every time works instead of things that doesn't work.
So speaking of devising, the summer that we spent together in Berlin a couple years ago, which you mentioned, we hung out and then you went and did a devising workshop. What did you learn from that, and what do you bring to your method or your music making projects from that theater world?
So after I came back from the theater world, I was able to articulate to my collaborators at the onset of the project exactly what the rules are. And so in the theater devising world, the agreement / the rules are the most important thing. And every company has their own process. So for example, some company says, we will only entertain, actually, let me try this again. Some company says we will entertain anybody's idea. So if you have an idea, we'll try it out. And we'll try it out 3 times. And then we will stop or whatever. So for my own process is anybody in the group has the right to veto something. 100%, like, I hate it. This is terrible. I don't want it. And they have the right to insist on including something. I really want this. I want to make it work. So, and it's our job as collaborators to make those things happen in general. So if someone think I really, really want to talk about rape on this project, if I've done that before, then we all go, okay. And our job is to find a way to talk about it in the music and in the project that works, that flows into other topics. And, but I would say that a good collaborator would be really judicious about how many times they use the insist button over the course of a project. So I would say like most of the collaborators are quite good. They use it a couple times each way, and then the rest of the time they let the project flow forward. And I always say, if you don't feel like you have to insist on something, don't insist on it. But if you do, go ahead. And that's what makes the project good. Instead of everyone being kind of like lukewarm about everything, you need some passion to drive each of the points. So what I learned in Berlin is that it's important for you to have agreements from the beginning. So those are the things I didn't do before I went there. So I thought some of things are more implicit, like you kind of get it. And now I spell it right out, and there's a whole thing that I wrote. And I think I'm doing my scheduling more carefully. So like I make sure that each of the sections has the time that it needs. And then I also feel like I am using even more physical, our physical body, and think of things in a much more spatial way in the performances and projects that I put together after that workshop as well. Yeah, and also to know that I was totally on the right path. I was really worried. I was worried I would go there and then it was all wrong.
It seems like out of all of your worrying, the results are always amazing. I mean, like what you're describing is sort of, I feel like it's just the rules for a good relationship.
Um, I think this particular process is really good for musicians or artists who has done their basic work on their primary instrument or primary medium. So that means that they have a very proficient or really good high command of what they do. Because what I'm asking you to do generally is I almost address no technical problems. Like it's expected that if you show up, you can basically do anything that is written for you, or and then the rest of it is just all extra stuff. So my experience is that if someone has a major deficiency in that, or they're not virtuosic, a lot of time they would spend more time in the process feeling really sorry and wanting to cover it up, and then it would be defensive. So like if you're really proficient in something and someone said, I think that B flat is kind of weird, you wouldn't feel that it is a personal attack. You would just go, yeah, it probably is, isn't it? Let's listen to that. But some people would just go like, what do you mean? I'm just totally doing the right thing. And like I've seen that in other situations. So like those are the things I watch for. So when Kyle says, how do you find collaborators? So I would say 1/3 of them, I find them through doing projects. I perform nationally. So a lot of time I'm just quietly watching my colleagues, and what kind of people. I'm like, ooh, that person, it's like has a spark. And I think like there is a level of magic in people that is completely not is indescribable. I'm always looking for magic. I almost don't care what medium you are. You can be a painter and you could be magical, or a dancer. And then the next one is then we'll become friends. And over time, I would see whether there is a way to connect. Once in a while, I would take a chance. I don't even like the word. Sometimes I would have someone come into the process quite much more new to the thing, because intuitively I think they would work. And those are always risks, in a way. But the idea is the method can absorb those risks usually, as long as they're not like majorly difficult. And so far, no problem. And then I have return people. And then the people would also recommend other people. They would say like, oh, I have this colleague who's really interesting and crazy, and I think it would be really fun to work with that person. And so much of the work that I end up doing, or we end up owning together, are really quirky and representative of the people who does them. you know it's totally different. Every project is completely different. Yeah.
I just think it's awesome. And it makes sense. I mean, I just think this is like a more organic way for projects to come about, because they're stemming directly from the people, and it's like a very democratic process in a way, but there are still rules. So it's orderly. It's not just complete chaos. And so it's kind of, I don't know, it makes a lot of sense. And
It's
I mean, a
really
lot, sorry, go
um
ahead.
no, sorry. In the devising world and in my world, I used to use the word democratic a lot, and now I would say that it's completely not democratic. It's just really collaborative. It's not democratic because it's not majority rules. I have learned that in process where the majority rules, the project is always kind of lukewarm, not very good. Because if something scares us, then we don't do it. And instead the other one is, if someone insists on doing something, we all do it. That is not democracy. That is
You're right.
opposite. And
Yeah.
we'll all go like, okay, I guess we'll do it, but let's see how we can be real creative about making this work for me. And eventually you even remove yourself from it too. You go, I'm starting to see your goal as my own. I start to care about telling your story too. I no longer care about my discomfort, I more want to talk about the thing you want to talk about. And sometimes it takes a lot of power persuasion. We have sit around a lot talking about these things. And sometimes some projects are harder. We have done projects where we mostly talk about like feminine power and trauma. And the power part's so easy. The trauma part was really hard, you know? And then but we're able to go through it. And I feel like every time we do it, we're better people too. We find like new repertoire. Again, if we only vote for things, I think we would just really stay quite conservative. And but
Yeah, I didn't use that word properly.
no, like I used to use it too because it sounds good.
But you're right, it's collaboration. It's because you're compromising. It's like a multi-channeled relationship of some kind where you're giving and receiving and
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good relationship, right? Sometimes you do things that you don't even want to because you are banking on the other time that they will do the same for you when it's really important for you. And I think that's where you buy like the currency of relationship. Yeah, I think so much of it at the beginning is a pushback to the experience of being sort of trained as a like conservatory musician. I started really young. You know, my mom ran a music school and then I went to conservatory like music high school in England. And it was just conservatory, really like elite training. And I found that it's really easy for one to lose the soul of making music, which is for me hanging out with friends and talking about things and letting the interests of the day like drive you, and it just lose to like what is fashionable or what is correct. I think correctness is my least favorite thing to explore because who cares, not for me, you know. So yeah, that's it.
Can you talk a little bit about your community arts nonprofit in Portland called the Big Mouth Society? Why was it important to build that, first of all? And second of all, what is your experience, I guess, using improvisation in sort of an amateur community?
Okay. um I wouldn't call Big Mouth an amateur community at this point. As you would say, Big Mouth is a collective of artists from absolute beginners who has never ever made music or art before to a world touring professionals, and we are under the same umbrella, making 4 to 6 projects a year. Why did I find it important to make it at the beginning? It was that I was a part of so many art projects that were excellent and spent a lot of money and time to make where there are no audience. And like I'm sure you've read these articles that say, you know what's the problem of new music or what's the problem of early music is that no one liked them. like like no one goes to these concerts. And on one hand we can huff and puff and think it's complete bullshit, and on the other hand it's true. So I find it really important to build things that would be a built-in audience, a built-in group of people who care about the process you make and the differences you make in the community. So like that was the first thought. Like, so you have to know I'm an immigrant. So I came to the US when I was 17. I didn't know anyone, so I didn't move with my family. So like making community is super important for me to like not die. So basically everywhere I go, the first thing I think about is like, how can I connect to people and be like and belong? And I think like today people think of belonging as a status you achieve. Like it's something someone grant you. You belong because someone grant you access to this club. And for me, belonging is making yourself belong by being indispensable to a community. Like when you provide and when you serve and you become the beating heart of a situation, then you belong. No one can kick you out. And it was really important to me. So when I moved to Portland, everyone told me that Portland is really provincial. It's a very small town. And a lot of the artistic organizations are really well meaning and also old, and they do their own thing. So when I was thinking about, I would like to present work that is that evolves, that answers social and emotional and personal questions and can be artist led. I want an organization that is like a safe place for misfit toys, I always say. And then I can't count on joining someone else's thing because no one's doing it. You know, most of the organizations are project based. It's not like people based. So I was thinking about that, but then it all seems too hard, to be honest. And like, I don't want to start a nonprofit. So I started running community salons. I started running like little ensembles and hang out with these amateurs mixed with professionals. And a couple years later, actually, after a crazy show I did, the naked show I did, that's actually where Kyle met me. He went to the show. One of the subsequent fangirls became basically the founding lawyer for the nonprofit. She came to me and said, "I would very much like to turn all of your different endeavors and help you put it under one umbrella, where all of these musicians can, you know, be sponsored through this nonprofit." So we started this nonprofit, and partly is I told you this earlier in the interview, that most professionals don't think of amateurs as any kind of artists. They don't think that they're anything other than paying them to teach them something that they probably can't do anyway. They don't think that these people also have a chance to experience an artistic process that can enrich their lives. And so that's something that's more and more important to me, to introduce these artistic way to see the world and going through these process to think of an issue, and also being able to perform and work alongside professionals without a hierarchical structure. So the professionals work next to them are not their boss or like special. They're just working next to them. And then the professionals can then have the support and understanding and friendship of all of these really interested amateurs. And so we all, you know, do workshops and classes and retreats and performances and together. So I think like over time, all of these amateurs find this particular group to be like the most hardcore hobby you can have, where you can learn like the etiquette and the challenges and the process of making art, something they would never be asked to do, you know? And so, so that was basically the first thing. So we have done some interesting process. Do you remember earlier I said that I bring an acro yoga teacher into the group and I do these warm ups? So that's with this community, you know, and we'll watch these interesting videos and follow, and I'm always asking people to stay on top of the most current interesting thing in the world and discuss, and we'll do those too. And then so another thing is most artists have problem with funding. Funding an audience is the main thing. So with this particular model, I'm using the model of either CSA or like a dance school, where the dancers at the bottom who are learning are paying into the collective to fund the collective, and then the professionals are paid, but also, you know, give into the collective in the way of time and sometimes even money. So basically, we have a really healthy pile of money at all times to do shows without having to rely too much on just grant and fundraising. And we don't have any paid staff, and all of our shows are pay as you can, but actually we're doing really well on that as well. So yeah, so it's really interesting. So that is sort of another layer of work that is an experimentation. You know, we're improvising, and every time someone has an idea, we'll say, let's try it. What's the worst that can go? We don't have to go through too many layers of bureaucracy to try a new idea. And so some of the ideas sticks and they become really helpful. And we're sharing that with other nonprofit in Portland as well. Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I think that's a really important way to sort of bridge the gap between people in the scene. I mean, it's all part of the scene. Maybe not a similar scene in Cleveland, but there's definitely there are a lot of improvisers in town who you know, they're not professional musicians because that's not their primary way of making income, but they're amazing artists, and it's, you know, been really enriching for me to play with them. But there aren't that many professionals who play with them, and it's like there's this weird, you know, there's less of a divide now, but I think it's awesome that there's this model that's even more integrated that you've started. Do you know if something like that is going on in other cities?
I don't know. And one phenomenon I have discovered is people who are doing really sincere community work are not famous. Like when I found out about their work, I realized that they spend all of their time working with their own people instead of promoting it, because there's nothing to promote. There's like the audience is the people in the group. So I'm starting to more and more see that actually a big part of my output is the relationship and these organizations that I curate over time, and it's hard to describe them. Yeah.
But I think it's so valuable that you're doing that work. And I think all the time about what Pauline Oliveira said, that if you have a community, you'll have a career.
Yes. And yeah, and especially in Portland. Like at least I know every time I try something new and weird that someone would be excited to see it, and then they will have the vocabulary to compare and contrast it with all of the other work that we all have been making for the last 3-4 years, and see what barriers we have overcome. It's like a school of thought. I'm starting to more and more really see that looking at art and doing music and doing other things is a way of life that you can teach other people. And in the past, we relied too much on the wisdom of these old white man giants to tell us what these things should feel like and look like. And it's time for us to do it ourselves. Yeah.
I guess the final question is, what are you working on now?
So many things. I also have a list here. Let me see. I am at the beginning part of a multi-year journey in writing this opera about the plague. It's a multilingual, multi-stylistic opera that has a huge degree of improvisation. And it's going to be premiere in DC at some point when this whole thing is over. And it explores the idea of actually so many things: power, gender dynamics, politics, and also the concept of science, and how are people dealing with science and technology at every single period of the plague. So the earliest depiction of the plague was in 7th century. And have we really moved on much since the 7th century to now? Actually, no. But we'll talk about that with different style of music. And I am releasing that short film that we made in a couple months ago. So doing a lot of post-production and dealing with that. I'm actually starting rehearsal for my nonprofit again. We're doing a project actually where the goal mostly is to keep people sane. But the work that we're doing is music inspired by the music of Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is a wide variety of random music. And we're like digging into the history and lots of long form improv that we're doing as well. And then I'm producing an R&B record for one of my students in December. And recently I met a incredible writer who got into the hidden history and forgotten history of Chinese Americans in Oregon. And it's a topic that has been basically hugely ignored and forgotten. And so we're starting on a, again, multi-year project in finding out more and turning a lot of these into artistic projects for people in Oregon. So, and I think, but most importantly, generally my primary job is to stay chipper and not freak out, so that I can be of use to other people too. Yeah, it's like staying happy and hanging out is my primary job in life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time. This was really interesting and inspiring, and my head is all, the wheels are turning, so thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out, and I'm be happy to hang out and talk more and do things together.
Yes,
Sounds
thank you
good.
so much, Emily. You know I love you. I
Mwah.
appreciate you.
I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Have a
sounds
good
great.
night.
See you.
Bye.